Hi there, I was just sorting through the videos that I've taken recently and I found this one that I haven't shared with you yet. This is a sketch of a Shake It tag that I made at Christmas for a tag swap that I took part in over at Tag Tuesday. So I'm making a few of these tags, so if you bear with me. But the first piece that I cut was 3 inches by 6 inches, and I always keep this little tag handy because most of my tags start at exactly the same size. And I'm just using it as a template to trim all my pretty snowflake papers into a tag shape. Next I cut some white card to measure 3¼ inches by 8 inches, and I'm going to make those into the base or the frame of my tag, and I'm just trimming the bottom of each of those pieces of paper with my snow flurries on the edge die. The next step is to attach the pattern paper to the base tag with the snowflake trim. I'm using double-sided tape, and once I've attached my paper I'm just going to snip the top of the tag to fit. I'm using a 1/2 inch hole punch and then attaching some white circles to the top of my tags, and then I'm going to punch it with my crocodile ready to take my ribbon. So my base tags are taking shape. To make the shaker portion of the tag, cut a piece of white cardstock that measures 4 inches by 2½ inches and then emboss it. I'm using the Cuttlebug Swiss Dots embossing folder. Looks a little bit like snowballs. Next I'm going to use one of the Spellbinders Nestabilities. I've got the Petite Scalloped Ovals, large, and I'm going to use the 3-inch oval to cut an aperture into my shaker card. To make the back of the shaker card, I'm going to do a resist technique to make a snowy scene that sits behind the oval aperture. So I've cut some cardstock that measures 2¼ inches by 3¾ inches, and I'm going to use some Perfect Medium re-inker, a bit of sponge, my heat gun, and I've got some clear embossing powder. I've also created a mask using my 1/2 inch punch and some scrap cardstock. Next, using the aperture that you cut earlier, you're going to use it to position the moon on the back of the shaker tag. So when you're happy with the position of the moon, you can remove the aperture, and then you want to add some Perfect Medium ink to the area inside that mask. So just use a re-inker and a little bit of foam, something like a makeup sponge. I've got this little bit of foam that I had lying around, and you just want to add a very small few dabs of the gluey ink to that foam, and then lightly tap it through the aperture that will become the moon on the back of your tag. The trick is not to add too much ink because you want a mottled effect. You don't want a full coverage of the clear embossing powder. So cover that circle and give it a good flick to get rid of all the excess embossing powder. You don't always do this, but for this technique you need to get rid of as much of the embossing powder as you can. If you find that you've been a little bit too heavy-handed with the ink, then go back with a paintbrush, and instead of this time clearing up the stragglers as you would normally doing any embossing, you actually want to physically take off some of that embossing powder so that you end up with a motley coverage once you melt the embossing powder with your heat gun. Next we want to create a snow line, and I've worked out with my aperture that I roughly want my snow line to sit just slightly under halfway up this background tag. So I'm just running the foam with the Perfect Medium ink over the bottom section of my tag, and I'm going to emboss it with clear embossing powder. And this two-step process is going to form the resist that makes the scene for the background of my shaker tag. Once you've melted the embossing powder, allow it to cool before you start inking, and I'm going to be using Chipped Sapphire and Broken China Distress inks and my ink blending tool to ink the sky of my shaker tag. So starting with the chipped sapphire, I'm going to ink an area around the moon and this is where you see the resist technique start to do its magic. And then I'm going to ink with the chipped sapphire right around the edge of the sky. As you can see, I'm using my messy mat. It slips a little bit on this surface, so you'll have to excuse it wobbling about a bit, but I start by applying the ink and then I go back to the lighter colour of the chipped sapphire and I use that to blend the two colours together. That way I'm not darkening too much the lighter panel that I've put on with the distress ink. And then if you just take a little bit of kitchen roll and wipe over the embossed area, you can get rid of any excess ink. And then I'm going to use some water. I'm going to splash that onto the distress ink and it has the effect of lifting some of the ink away, and it's quite a nice technique if you want to create a snowy background. So I'm dipping my fingers into the water and then I'm going to flick that water. I'm taking off the excess into the bowl there and then lightly flick over the inked area so that I get small droplets of water on my inked background. I'm going to leave it a couple of seconds so that the water reacts with the ink, and when I'm happy it's starting to do its magic, I'm going to lift off the excess water and dry it with a piece of kitchen roll. And if you decide that you want your sky to be a little more snowy, then just add a few more drops of water. Again, remove. I've got a real snowstorm going on now. I thought I'd leave this little mistake in here. I'm just drying off the water and re-inking my tag because I wasn't happy. I thought I'd been a bit heavy-handed with the water, so I'm just going back, re-inking as I did before, and then I'm going to apply the water a little more gently this time. That's better. I'm more happy with that. As you can see, I've got a nice snowy scene going on there. Just darkening the edges so that they show through the aperture of my card. So as you can see, the distress inks are quite forgiving and you've got a little bit of playtime before you have to commit. There we go, I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to show you how to make these little trees using this oak leaf punch from Woodware. So starting at what will become the top of my tree, I'm grouping together 3 of the leaves and then I'm going to work my way gradually adding leaves one on top of the other to form what looks like a pine tree shape. There's no exact science to this. I'm literally just piling the leaves together until I get the size and shape of pine tree that I want. And then I'm taking some of this Snow-Tex paint just to add a little bit of snow onto my pine tree. So next it's time to decorate your trees. Now once you've glued your tree into position, so use your aperture again for this, I'm going to use these tiny wooden stars to decorate my trees. So I'm colouring them with a red marker. So once you're happy with the position of your tree, glue it into position and then glue some form of decoration. It could be sequins, it could be beads, onto your tree. And then I'm just going to give it a little bit of sparkle with some red stickles. Cut a piece of red cardstock that measures 2 5/8 of an inch by 4 1/8 of an inch. So it should sit like a frame behind your aperture. And the next thing we want to do is remove anything that's going to show through that aperture. So I've used the aperture as a template to draw around to show the position of the oval. And then I'm going to remove all but about 1/2 inch of the frame so that you can't see any of the frame inside the aperture. Now you're going to attach a piece of acetate to the wrong side of the aperture. So cut a piece of acetate that measures 2 1/4 inches by 3 1/4 inches and then using double-sided tape attach it to the back of your frame. And then add some more double-sided tape and attach the whole thing to the red frame. Now you can see the shaker section starting to take shape. My favourite way of adding the depth to my shaker card is to use strips, 1/8 inch strips of a thick cardstock, which I am cutting to length and sticking slightly inside the frame of my shaker card. Once the glue from your raised frame is dry, then you're ready to add the shake to your shaker card. I'm using Ice Diamond from Pinflair, 1 because it's very frosty and 2 because it doesn't stick to the acetate. So I'm adding enough sprinkles to form the snow in my shaker card, and then more glue to that cardboard frame, and then I'm going to attach the snowy scene to enclose all those sprinkles and to finish the shaker section of my tag. Again, I let this glue dry before you move it about too much. Then once you're happy that all your glue is dry, then it's safe to pick it up and give it a little shake. And now for the finishing touches. I'm adding a little bit of sheer and iridescent ribbon to the tops of all the tags. I'm just looping the ribbon through the tops of the tag and then trimming the ends of the ribbon. Then I took a short length of this shiny red ribbon and I attached 2 little silver jingle bells to the ends of that and tied it round the ribbon that's sitting on top of my tag. And then you're ready to stick the shaker portion of your tag into position. Then some more finishing touches. I'm using my hot glue gun this time to add a strip of sparkly red ribbon and some pretty snowball trim. Most of the tags that I make have got some form of wording on, and I'm going to use these 2 Stampin' Up punches, which are extra large bottom label and large window word. I use these quite a lot, particularly for cards. So I've always got a set of printed greetings that fit into these punches standing by, and I'm going to use these winter wishes. So using the punches, I'm punching out my greeting and then my red card frame. I'm going to attach the 2 together with glue, and then I'm going to attach it in position just slightly above the edge of the top of my shaker, again with glue. And for the final finishing touches, I've just cut out some coordinating snowflakes with a couple of snowflake punches, and I'm adding gems to their centres. And then for a final touch of frosting, I'm going to use a diamond stickles to add a little bit of sparkle to all of the embossed dots on the aperture of my shaker card. I hope you like this tutorial enough to make a shaker tag for yourself. All my tags were carefully parcelled up and then swapped with my tag partners over at tagtuesday.blogspot.co.uk. So once I'd sent away all my pretty tag swaps, all I was left with was this great big mess. Thank you for watching.